Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to be here with you. So I am Izzy Redding. I'm a medical statistician by training, and I'm the director of our NIHR research support service delivered by the University of Southampton and partners. And I'm going to talk to you today a bit about how projects get funded, thinking about processes and people. And as Sophie has mentioned already, we think it's really useful for you to understand what is going to happen to your application once you have submitted it. And that will help you kind of think backwards to think what your application needs to look like. So the first thing I want to say is that actually, if you have got to the stage where you have submitted your application, you have already done really well. To get to that stage is a lot of work. It's a lot of organisation. It's probably a fair bit of stress. So you will have done a great job in having uploaded all that information on time for your funder. So first of all, that is a milestone in the first place. So I'm going to talk about processes first of all. And the process of a research funding application is a bit of a game of snakes and ladders. There's quite a lot of different steps, and you can kind of scuttle up a few rungs when you get to a next stage of success. But unfortunately, you can also slither all the way back down to the beginning at various stages too. Sophie has already mentioned things about stage 1 and stage 2. And this is where you will find that different funders and different funding schemes will have slightly different processes. So some of them will ask for something called an EOI, which is an expression of interest. Some of them will have what Sophie's already mentioned, and NIHR in particular has this where you have a stage 1 application, and this is then followed up, if you're shortlisted, by a stage 2 application. And the stages are actually pretty good for everyone. As researchers, it stops you potentially putting in a huge, vast amount of work into a really detailed application if it turns out your funder isn't going to be interested. So having that slightly pared back version at stage 1 will save you some time and effort, but also save some time and effort for the funders and their processes in reviewing your application. So there are some quite good reasons why this staged approach exists. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that your funding application will go through. Initial scrutiny, when your application first lands on the funder's metaphorical doorstep. Who will review your application? Subject experts, methodological reviews, and reviews from lay members of the public. I'm going to talk a bit about the different type of panels where you get groups of people together who will look at your work, and how those work. And that's quite an important key bit, I think, to understand in the process. So first of all, scrutiny. When your application first is received by a funder, they will do a number of things. So as Sophie has already mentioned, they'll do some really basic checks to ensure that your work fits the remit for their funder. So obviously, as Sophie has said, it's important to get that bit right and to get over that first hurdle. They'll also look to just check that your application submission has kind of gone through correctly and that you've completed all the information that they need to know. And they may start to do some kind of check to see whether your work kind of looks competitive at a first glance. So that might be looking very briefly at who your team members are, and a couple of other bits and pieces. And that competitive bit may be done by some of the secretariat that work for the funder, or it may be done by a subgroup from the funding panel. So there are sort of a variety of people who might look at that part. Hopefully your application will sail through that part, and you will probably find that your application starts to be looked at by a panel. And again, there are different types of panels, and I will talk about the different types. Who you might find are the members of the panels, and therefore the kind of people you need to be addressing and who you need to persuade that your work is important and should be funded, and also the procedures of what happens in the room when a panel is going on. So you might find there's something called a prioritization panel. And this might be where they're less interested in sort of the things like the methods that you're employing, but what they really care about is the topic area. And is that a priority to that funder? Is it the kind of work they're really backing and looking to fund research in? You'll then get your stage 2, where people are thinking much more carefully about, do we really, really want to fund this? Do we want to put money into this? And that stage, there'll be much more scrutiny about, can this team really deliver? Are these really the methods that are the right way to answer this question? And you might have some panels where they do all of that in one go. So they'll be looking at both the importance of the question as well as all the other bits that go together to make your funding application, and seeing that they are all fitting and all correct. So the kinds of people who are on panels are a variety. So you will see that here you might have a variety of different types of doctors. You might have medical doctors, and you might have, some other doctors or medical and care practitioners. You'll probably have some people who come from a variety of settings, so whether that's hospital settings, primary care, possibly local authority if public health is of interest, or it's social care. You will then have some methodologists. So this old-fashioned looking chap in the middle is a statistician. He is called William Seeley Gossett, and he was the person who invented the t-test, for those of you who are interested. So you will find you have methodologists on the panel. You'll have statisticians, you may have sort of behavioural scientists, qualitative researchers, and you will also have some health economists who'll be really looking at your work with that kind of a lens. You'll also have members of lay members who are representing the interests of patients and public. So you need to bear in mind that those people may have a very different understanding and a very different lens, and you need to make sure that your work can speak to them in a way that they can understand and also appreciate the value of your work. So I'm going to talk a bit about panels. Your work is being discussed, your funding application is being discussed. How long do you think a panel will spend discussing your project? And in a way, the answer is it kind of depends. But I think you are all broadly on the right lines, that there will be a defined amount of time. Partly it will depend on how many applications need to be discussed during that meeting. Some of the NIHR panels have sort of 2-day meetings that last for a very long time, but they are wading their way through lots and lots of applications. So you're right, panels don't have a lot of time to really kind of cogitate and have a leisurely scientific discussion about your work. And that's quite important to understand, that the point of panels is to make a decision and to come to an agreement together. It isn't to have this leisurely conversation. And you'll have different people on panels will perform a different job. So often panels are set up so that you have a couple of people who are called lead assessors, and they will present the work to the rest of the panel. So they will have read it thoroughly. They will have read it well enough to feel as though they understand the project, and they will give a brief review of that application. And they may also be asked to share their view on the quality. And so they might give what's called an indicative score of what they think. And they will give the key headlines of what they think are the good points about the project, what they think are the downsides about the project. And again, they might be asked to give an indication. Do we think this should be shortlisted? If it's a stage 1 application, do we think this should be funded? So they will give that view. And they are highly influential because they set the tone for the discussion that follows. So you'll often have a lead assessor who starts. You might have a second assessor who kind of fills in anything extra in the way of information that they think is pertinent. They might have an alternative view that they will bring to, combat some of the comments the main assessor has given. And then the discussion will be opened up to the rest of the panel. So the rest of the panel will be the kind of people who have maybe sort of speed read through your application. And that might be a bit heartbreaking to hear that not everyone has pored over your lovingly crafted application for hours and hours. But unfortunately, there will be people in the room who have had the quickest of looks. They might have looked very specifically at the certain areas that interest them the most. So the statisticians might well head for any of the statistical aspects to ensure they understand and can comment on those, but they may well have skim-read some of the other sections. And they will, all have read the lay summary to make sure they've got an overview of the project. And the role of the chair is to summarise the discussion that's going on, to kind of let people know the sense of the feeling in the room. So sometimes I've heard a panel chair say something like, does anyone have anything further to save this application if there's a sense that there isn't a lot of enthusiasm for it and they're trying to make sure it gets a fair hearing? And they will facilitate some kind of agreement and, most importantly, a decision within the panel. So they will try and encourage panel members to be decisive. They don't want lots of people sitting on the fence giving it a mid-score, because that's not very helpful. So they will probably try to reflect. If the feeling is positive, they'll be saying, this seems like a great application. It seems that people are broadly supportive of it. Similarly, if that's not the way the conversation is going, they will say, it seems that this panel has some fundamental issues with this. Let's all score. And then often there will be a moment where, there's some electronic system or other way that the panel will vote and give their scores of the application. So it is really a very structured meeting, and people play their particular roles. And as I say, I think it's quite important that you understand that. A key thing about lead assessors is they may be someone like me. So I'm a statistician, and if I'm a panel member, which I am a panel member and have been in the past of a few different panels, I will be called upon just like anyone else to be a lead assessor. And that means that you need to make sure your work is understandable to the likes of me. And I've never worked in the NHS, and I may not understand all of that nuance. And so it will be up to you writing your application to ensure that you've convinced me of the importance of the work, of the importance to the health and care system, and all of that kind of stuff as well. Just to think a bit more about the role of the panel overall. So the stage 1 panel is very much looking to shortlist to stage 2. So at this moment in time, they're not thinking about parting with money, but they are thinking about what is of interest that we would like to see a fuller application of. So they might have guidance as to what proportion or number of projects to shortlist. And that is partly for their workload, but also they don't want researchers spending lots and lots of time producing a stage 2 application if there's very little chance of it being funded in the end. And at stage 1, they may focus more on the weight of the importance of the work. And at that point, they may well try and give really useful feedback to the researchers to try and guide them as to where there were a few queries so that they can answer them. Funding panels really like to see good applications, and they too try and be helpful. And they will give feedback also on the team, whether they think the team is the right makeup and whether the project looks like it's good value for money. So at a stage 2 meeting, or if you've just got a single stage meeting, they'll be looking to recommend for funding. So they'll be saying to the broader funder, yes, we think this is really important work. We're satisfied with the methods that are being proposed. We're satisfied that the team can deliver, and we recommend that you fund it. Again, they might have guidance as to how many they can fund, which may well be based on the budget of the funder for that kind of funding round. And they will pay particular attention to how any feedback that the research team has received so far, how much that has been addressed. So that's a really important aspect. If you get through to stage 2 and have been given feedback, they do expect you to take it seriously and to give it really due consideration. And they'll look much more closely at the value for money, and those aspects of delivering the project, whether the team can do it, whether all the kind of processes appear to be in place for this work take off. So I'm going to speak briefly about the external reviewers because I haven't mentioned those at all yet. So as well as the people who are in the panel considering your work, at some point in the process, which might be at stage 1, it might be at stage 2, a funder will often go out to external reviewers and ask for written feedback on your application. And usually external reviewers are a combination of methodologists, subject area experts, who may not be represented on your funding panel, and also views of the lay public or patients. And this may be the only opportunity to have direct, relevant subject expert comments on your proposal. So you do need to make sure that your proposal can speak to those other experts in your field. Those might be sort of practitioners who are thinking, would this really benefit the social care system, or would this really benefit the NHS? Could it be carried out in those settings? And might have a very practical view on whether they think it's an important subject and whether what your project would deliver would be of interest and have impact. So you do have to make sure that your work can speak to those people who really, really understand your area just like you do. So just a few more comments about people and the people involved in all of these processes. So just a few thoughts on panel members and reviewers. First of all, they are real humans. They are other researchers just like you. They know what it's like to write an application, so they do understand and appreciate how much work goes into writing applications and getting them submitted. They will have expertise, but it may not necessarily be in your subject area. And they will be working on behalf of the funder. They are a representative of the funder, and they will know what the funder is and isn't looking for, and they will very much come to your work with that lens. And by and large, they will want to do a good job. You know, they have their own reputation that they want to uphold, and they will largely start off on your side because they are a fellow researcher like you. They will also be busy. They might not have much time to devote to your proposal, particularly if they've got a whole raft of different proposals that all need reviewing, ready for the panel meeting. They will start forming an opinion of your application straight away. So I always mention a project that unfortunately, the very first page, one of the first pieces of information is who is the lead applicant. And on a project that we reviewed a while ago, they had managed to misspell their own name. Now, clearly that was just a mistake and it was very unfortunate, but it doesn't bode well for going into an application if the first thing you see are, you know, obvious errors or mistakes. So the kinds of things that a reviewer will do is that they will head straight for your plain English summary. And this is a really important part of the application. I'm not going to labour the point because we'll be discussing that later on today, but it's true that everyone looks at that bit because that really helps orientate a reviewer as to what comes next. So it's really important that you produce a plain English summary that is in plain English, but it's clear, concise, it's complete and really accurate and reflects the work that's going to come. And you will help your reviewer a lot if you manage to do that. They will be looking for a justification and the rationale for all the aspects of the study, and they will expect that to be in the application. So they shouldn't have to feel the need to fill in the blanks or assume why you're doing the work that you're doing. You should lay that out for them. They'll carefully compare the aims of your work with the work that you're proposing. So will you really answer the question that you have set out with the project that you're proposing to deliver? As I've said, they'll have in mind the remit of the funding stream, and they will judge the strength of your proposal, at least in part, on the strength of your writing about it. And some funders try and think in terms of what's a fixable fault and what is a fatal flaw. So they are flexible. They're not saying everything has to be perfect. It's very hard indeed to get research completely perfect, and there will be a strong understanding of that. But they will think about, is this a fundamental problem that we can't get over, or are there some tweaks that we could suggest that would get this project into a state to be fundable? So reviewer expectations. I think reviewers would like to be able to visualize your project plan in detail so that they really understand what you're asking this money for, and what the project will deliver. They'll want to be convinced of the need for the work to really be able to see that, and that they can see what your work will provide once it's complete. They'll want to see what the impact and the benefit might be, whether that's immediate or a bit further down the line. And they'll want to be persuaded that your team can deliver, and that you have the right set of skills and the right set of support around you, and that the costs have been justified. A few irritations to try and avoid. Reviewers don't really want to kind of make sense of your brain dump and every last thing that you know about. This isn't the moment to sort of be trying to show off anything and everything that you know about the subject area. What they want is something that's nice and streamlined and really talks them through your rationale for your study. And they don't want to read lots and lots of dense text. And Sophie will be talking about some of those and how to combat that a bit later. They don't want to fight through a blizzard of acronyms. That's a phrase that I've heard someone say in a panel a while ago. So think very carefully about, it's tempting to use acronyms, particularly when word count is tight, but do try and keep those to a minimum where you possibly can. They don't want to spot numerous typos. So make sure that other people read your work, because often you can get to the stage where you can't see the wood for the trees yourself anymore. So my final slide, reviewers don't want to be made to feel stupid, ideally. So please don't try and blind them with science. This is the moment to have a really transparent, easy to understand application where you bring your reader with you. So don't just blind with science or think the science speaks for itself. That is your job to speak on its behalf. But try not to patronize either. So there is a kind of balance to be had with the pitch that you write at. Guide your reader through your proposal. Ensure you've got a logical flow and an argument. I think if you're doing anything that's particularly novel or niche or unusual, try and give reassurances that it is the right approach and that your team really does have the expertise to embark on that. And test your proposal out on colleagues, friends, family, and on us, the research support service.